Hey, hi everybody, and welcome to the final session of day one, all about horizon scanning and climate change. Our Emily is a program development coordinator at the Oasis Species Center, and she'll be our moderator for this session. I'll pass it over to you, Em.
Thank you, Maddie, for the introduction. So I'll get us started with Brendan Standish, who's coming to us from the Department of Plant Industry at Clemson University. And today he is presenting Risky Business, Assessing the Risk of Satellite Infestations for Asian Longhorned Beetle in the Greater Charleston Area. Welcome, Brendan.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. Here, I'll go ahead and share this real quick and we can get started. All right, is everybody able to see the screen okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, awesome. So yes, this is my thesis research that I conducted at the College of Charleston for assessing areas proactively for their habitat suitability towards becoming a satellite infestation for Asian longhorn beetle out here in Charleston. In my job, I'm a regulatory specialist for Clemson's Department of Plant Industry. And now I am also a PhD student or at Clemson in the Wildlife and Fisheries Biology program. So a little bit of a rundown here. We're kind of just going to look at what is Asian longhorn beetle or ALB overarchingly. Why is ALB an issue? Where is ALB found in the United States? Then we're going to zoom into the South Carolina quarantine zone specifically, because that's what I was looking at in my research. And then the research questions that surround that, the variables that I measured, how testing areas and plot sizes and numbers were determined, what the results were, and then a case study specific to the Charleston area and Mount Pleasant. So, what is Asian longhorn beetle? This is an invasive herbivorous wood-boring pest that is native to parts of China and the Korean Peninsula. What makes this such a prolific pest when it's introduced in areas is that it's able to infest and complete its life cycle in 12 different types of hardwood trees, ultimately killing them. And this pest has become established in portions of Asia, Europe, as well as here in North America. And if you look at the little figure to the right, you can see what the eggs look like when they are deposited by a female, which are roughly the size of a grain of rice on the outside of a tree. Those hatch and turn into the larva that chews and starts to develop into the pupa in the bottom right on the inside of the tree. And then when it is finally developed and becomes the adult, it'll chew its way out and mate and start the whole life cycle all over again. So why is this an issue? Essentially, this is just really bad for the agroeconomy in general in areas that it's introduced in. Any way in which wood or woody debris can be moved or focused on are industries that this impacts. And so that can include logging and timber, firewood sales, nursery stock procurement and distribution, tree trimming and pruning, and among others. And if this were to spread throughout its entire potential contiguous host range in the United States, it's estimated that upwards of $669 billion worth of damages would be seen to the agroeconomy. So it's definitely something that we don't want here and we don't want to spread into new areas. So where is ALB found in the United States? Historically, this has been introduced and established into 6 different states, being New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, Ohio, Illinois, and then South Carolina. This pest has been eradicated historically from Illinois as well as New Jersey, and there are still active infestations that persist in portions of Mass, New York, Ohio, and then here in South Carolina. Zooming into South Carolina, as of September 2025, this is what the quarantine zone looks like. So this is an area where ALB has been confirmed to be present, and what this incorporates are just every area where an infested tree has been found, as well as a buffer to account for natural spread and migration. And so this was roughly 76.4 square miles of quarantined areas. And so what my research focused on was what is kind of the probability of different areas if ALB were introduced to establish and to become a satellite infestation. Because the main way in which ALB moves is similar to other agricultural invasives through human-assisted movement. So I was looking to see what was the relative risk for spread and establishment in the greater Charleston area, which I'll talk about what those municipalities are in a bit. Um, if I were to survey only maples or the Acer genus, would this yield a similar risk assessment model to the five variables that we'll touch on in the next slide? And then is the usage of a variable that pertains to proximity to ports and campgrounds necessary in these type of studies here? And so the variables that I used in this initial study were host tree density, because without host trees for ALB to infest and complete its life cycle in, it's not able to establish in an area. And then I looked at spatial distribution of host trees, because other studies have used that as a variable in the past to see if areas that have a lot of closely lumped host trees together become more heavily infested than those with them further apart. Proximity to ports and campgrounds, because again, the main way that in which ALB is able to spread to new areas is through human-assisted movement. So whether that is through people bringing potentially firewood from other infestations to a new area, or whether that is improperly treated shipping materials like crates and pallets coming to a new area. I use this as one of those variables. And then high risk versus low risk host tree density. I use this because in North America as a whole, roughly 98% of the infested trees that we see are going to be in that maple or acer genus, but there are 12 hardwood tree genera that this can infest. So I wanted to see if the results, like what that would look like there with high risk on a plot versus low risk host. And then proximity to active infestation. And that's just because at least when I was looking at it, I was assuming that the closer you are to an active infestation, the higher a risk that it is that something could potentially spread outside of a quarantine zone. And so this is what the test area looked like. These are four different municipalities in the Charleston area, with them being James Island, Mount Pleasant, North Charleston, and downtown Charleston. And then over to the left, you can see the quarantined area for reference to where these were taken from. There are 191 total plots that I surveyed. It was originally 200, but there's a little portion of North Charleston that's technically I wish would have been included in this study, but due to accessibility not being allowed out there, I wasn't able to add that into the study there. So 9 plots were removed from that section. The number of plots that I put in each area was determined by the square mileage of each municipality divided by the total square mileage in the study itself. So it was kind of weighted proportionally based on how big an area was. And then I'll show what subregions look like here. These are essentially just a FishNet and ArcGIS Pro overlaid with these different municipalities that are roughly about 1 square mile on average in area here. And so these were just, there was at least one plot point that was put in each of these areas to ensure that each region in a municipality was being touched in this study. And then field maps here was used to log any time that I found a host tree, or also known as a regulated tree species in each of these areas. So if this were to be zoomed in, each of these spots where you see these red, yellow, or blue areas, those are square little 100 meter by 100 meter plots where I would randomly put them in here and survey to see what the host tree density would look like, and then compile the rest of the variables there. Green denoted a low risk host tree or just a non-maple. Red denoted maples being found in an area. And then any of these plots that have these little blue dots here, that would denote that there were no host trees in general in that area. And so some of the results, this is the initial risk assessment model that using those five variables was shot out using IDW in ArcGIS Pro, also known as inverse distance weighted. And so this would take each of those plot points that I surveyed, and when I added up the aggregate kind of risk in an area, it would model that throughout all the other places that I had not been to kind of show what areas would be high risk, low risk, medium risk. And then at the time when I did this study, no risk was one of the denotations that I used here as well. However, that's more so closer to a minimal or negligible risk as it's a non-zero value. And so here this showed that there are different areas, specifically in more heavily wooded areas that would be at higher risk in each of these municipalities here. However, you'll see a lot of that kind of no risk to low risk area being in some of the more industrialized portions of the Charleston area. Then this next one here was using only maple data. And so this is because maples are by leaps and bounds the most heavily infested genera of tree in comparison to the other host. I wanted to see would this kind of yield a similar result and similar risk assessment model because that could be potentially be able to streamline the process, make this quicker, and that could potentially be a best use of resources going forward if this was used by regulatory agencies looking to assess areas for risk of like satellite infestations to occur, or for people wanting to further this research in the future. And so it made similar types of results. It reduced the amount of potentially high risk areas in each of these for the most part, and it also increased what that kind of minimal, negligible, or low risk area would be. And then here, this is without the usage of a proximity to ports and campgrounds variable being utilized. And so the reason that I wanted to test if this was significant in the study is because everywhere here, each of the points that I surveyed was kind of within that, what would be denoted as high risk, just based on proximity to a port or campground. But if this were to be modeled to different areas, like in the upstate or further inland, I believe that proximity to ports and campgrounds would be necessary to really show what that looks like, what potentially that risk could be, because those are known pathways as to which ALB is able to really be introduced into an area. And then specifically, this is a case study here that I don't know if we want to count it as fortuitous or not, but I was hoping to never really have this be able to be tested with a spread of ALB in South Carolina because South Carolina was the only state that hadn't had a satellite infestation as of 2025. But I want you guys to focus right here on this area where you see this little connector here, that black circle popped up. That was denoted in the original case study as the highest risk potential area for spread of ALB in establishment. And that's important because as of October of 2025, a quarantine was enacted in a portion of Mount Pleasant, roughly 46 to 47 square miles out there. And the specific area where ALB was found was actually in that exact area that was coded as high risk per this study. So it's pretty interesting because it shows proof of concept that these variables are statistically significant and kind of able to be modeled going forward. And potentially this can be a groundwork laid for future wood boring pest studies for assessing areas for satellite infestation habitat suitability. Pardon. And so now, if y'all have any questions, please feel free to let me know. But also, if I don't get to any of them or you have some that pop up later, here's my email address to let me know. Thank y'all.
Thanks so much for the presentation, Brendan. I'm not quite seeing any questions in the Q&A or chat yet. Maybe we'll just give people a few seconds in case they've got any burning questions here. Yeah, if you are just joining us for this session, you are welcome to put your questions in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. Brendan's email is also in the chat if you did want to follow up later. Not seeing anything come through. So in the interest of keeping things moving, maybe we'll just move on from there. Like I said, Brendan's email is in the chat, so please send him a question there if you do come up with something later. Thanks again very much. Okay, so I want to introduce our next speaker. Coming from the University of Minnesota, we have Gigi DiGiacomo, and she will be presenting today on grape grower and wine consumer perspectives about spotted lanternfly management during early stages of infestation. Welcome, Gigi.
Thank you. Let me get my, let's see. Hang on. I'm sorry. I know we practiced this, but I am.
That's okay. We're ahead of schedule so far, so.
Yeah, I'm having trouble finding the share.
Should be at the bottom of your screen, and it's like a bright green color.
Oh, the bright green thing that says share. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Here we go. And I will now put this in presenter mode. Okay, there we go. Let me get myself out of the way. Okay, thanks everybody. Sorry about that. My name's Gigi DiGiacomo, and I am an economist at the University of Minnesota. I'll be speaking today about spotted lanternfly socioeconomics. It's the results that I'll be sharing are just the first year of some grower perceptions that come from a multi-state, multi-region study. Let's see, I'm trying to advance. There we go. Multi-region, multi-institution, multidisciplinary study that's called Area-Wide Management of the Invasive Spotted Lanternfly and Tree of Heaven. So with this project, we're trying to really address two invasives at once, the Tree of Heaven and the spotted lanternfly, because SLF, spotted lanternfly, it does prefer the Tree of Heaven as its host tree. It also prefers grapevine as a host site. So what we're finding is that vineyards that are surrounded by wooded areas, particularly those that are infested with Tree of Heaven, are now being really quite severely impacted by SLF as they move from those wooded areas into the vineyards. So our goal with this project was to conduct lab and field-based experiments in Pennsylvania and Virginia to explore the efficacy of area-wide biocontrols to weaken Tree of Heaven and suppress spotted lanternfly. And then while we have some very smart people that are working on that piece of the project, we have a lot of entomologists and viticulturalists that are coming from all of those institutions that you see at the bottom there of the page. Myself and another researcher, another sociologist, are going to be studying the socioeconomic impacts and implications, as well as behavioral change amongst growers over time as they deliver and we institute effective management recommendations. So I'm going to be sharing with you those the preliminary socioeconomic results today. If you were hoping for a little more on the biology, I'm sorry to disappoint, but I can always point you towards other people that are much more capable than I am of answering some of those questions. So to begin with, for those of you who are not familiar with SLF, it is a sap-feeding invasive that comes from Asia. It feeds on it feeds on the woody plant tissue of a number of more than 65 plant species. Like I mentioned, Tree of Heaven and grapes being some of its preferred hosts. And what it does is it saps the sap. It feeds on the sap in the tissue, and it degrades that plant over time. So things might not look too bad when SLF first shows up, but we know that as the years go on, that plant becomes, further weakened or degraded. And in the case of grapevines, growers are seeing, in year 2 and 3 of an infestation, they'll start seeing harvest losses, but then they may eventually have to actually replace the vines altogether because they're no longer producing. So the map there that you see shows the areas where spotted lanternfly has been identified. At this point, you can see it's, in the northeastern United States, starting to creep a little bit west and south, and also northward up into Canada. And it's projected that spotted lanternfly will in fact move all the way across the United States and reach California within 5 years. So it's a a fast-moving species, and it's why it's of such great concern and on everyone's lips as of late. You'll see on the right side there are some photos showing the different life stages of SLF. Starting at the top, those are the you see those like little light gray blotches on the left-hand side of that's a grapevine. Those are egg masses. Those are newly laid egg masses. And then to the right, there's some darker, kind of more discolored ones. Those are older egg masses. And then in the middle, there's 3 different nymph stages. They're the like more colorful little ones with this white spots. And then at the bottom is the full adult life stage of SLF. So what we wanted to study as sociologists and economists was we wanted to take a look at what growers' perceived costs of SLF treatment and management were, and then we'll be comparing that to the actual costs once we look at on-farm, we'll be managing and monitoring on-farm sites over the next 4 to 5 years. So we'll compare perceived costs with actual costs. And then we also wanted to learn more from growers and wine consumers about their perceived purchasing habits, sales, impact of SLF on the market economy in general. So we conducted one grower focus group in Virginia with 7 growers, and that was done early on in the project in 2025. And that really kind of informed a lot of the questions that we developed for our grape grower survey and wine consumer survey, which went out to a much broader, larger audience. The grape grower survey was fielded in March of 2025 through July of 2025. It was 43 questions. We distributed it using Qualtrics to different stakeholder wine and grape growing groups across the country. The wine consumer survey was also distributed using Qualtrics. We were able to pay for a sample that represented the general population. And so that we did get 1,000 paid consumer responses in 5 eastern states: Pennsylvania, West Virginia, New York, and New Jersey. All right, so jumping into the grower survey results, the states highlighted in yellow represent the areas where we did receive responses. We had 147 responses. This first year, we'll be conducting the same survey again in year 3 of the study. I hope we can boost those numbers by a lot. But as you see there in Virginia, we did get the largest sample, 81 growers, and that represented 55% of our overall responses. So we will be focusing on Virginia today with our grower survey results. And I think I should just take one step back. I think Virginia is a good one to look at because although SLF has been detected in Virginia for many years, it's really just starting to show up in the vineyards. And so I think it's a good one to look at for those of you who are in Canada because, pay attention. This is what things are going to look like when SLF first lands in your area. So it's just one to keep your eyes on. And then we'll see how it changes, how things change over time when we do this survey again in 3 years. But in terms of just demographics, our growers had 15 years of experience. They were typically growing Vitis vinifera and at least one other variety of grape. Their median annual gross sales was $100,000 per year. The average was much higher. It was $736,000. So that tells us there's probably a lot of smaller growers there with a few larger ones skewing that average higher. And agritourism is the top marketing channel that was used by 77% of the growers who took the survey. Here we're looking at the grower vineyard size. These are, again, the participants that responded to the survey. And you can see that not only were probably most of the growers selling, a small, or I guess, sorry, not only could we consider those growers small sized in terms of their gross value of their sales, but also in terms of acreage. So you see here that most of the vineyards fall in that 3 to 20 acre size range, with only about maybe 15% or so falling in the top category of over 20 acres per vineyard. Next, we asked growers a number of questions about how SLF was impacting their farm, and whether they'd even seen SLF. 85% of the growers said yes, they had seen SLF, and by far, median, almost all the growers said that the first year that SLF showed up in their vineyards was 2024. A few growers said 2023, but the majority said 2024. So we're catching them with this survey the first year that they're seeing SLF. Many growers reported that they saw low to medium levels of SLF infestation. By low, we mean less than 10% of the vines had SLF, some sort of SLF damage, and medium would be 10 to 25% of those vines. And I think, again, that level, I think those responses or infestation rates are low because this is the first year that they're seeing it. We know from our focus group that as growers, as the years go on, the damage becomes greater and greater. Our growers also told us that 67% were actively managing to control for SLF already in 2024. So they're trying to get ahead of the problem there. Most of the vineyard owners who were treating, 91% of those were focused on the adult life stage of SLF, while another 38% were focused on nymphs and 45% on eggs. I think this is going to end up being one of our key recommendations as we move further along with the project and have more results to support our assumptions here. But we're already learning that the nymph stage is probably the most treatable. That's when this insect is at its most vulnerable. So that's the stage to really be treating. And yet we're seeing most growers are not treating that nymph stage. I think they're going after the adults because most of them, as we know, are conducting wine tastings. They're managing, vineyards that are more of a destination, and so they can't have these adult SLF flying around during the wine tastings. Let's see, control strategies. We know that most growers are using insecticides to manage SLF. That's 60% of growers. Some are applying insecticides to manage SLF plus at least one other insect pest, so more of a broad spectrum approach, while 20% of growers are only targeting SLF with their insecticides and 6% are targeting the nymphs. Other treatments that are being used to treat for SLF include exclusion, netting, and then actually scraping to remove the egg masses or targeted removal of tree of heaven. For those of you who are interested in what pesticides are being used on the vineyards, I've got the list here. It shows on the y-axis the percent of growers who are using each insecticide. On the x-axis, you've got the name of the insecticide, and then just above each bar is the number of times that insecticide was applied in one season to address SLF. And you can see that 7 there is probably the most favored, along with Mustang Max and Scorpion or Venom. So more broad spectrum insecticides. Half of our Virginia growers who treated for SLF said they spent less than $1,000 a year to manage all SLF life stages. That really surprised me. And so again, I'm going to be really looking at these results in year 3 to see if they change. We had a third of growers who said they were spending $1,000 to $5,000 per year, which seems a little bit more in line with what I would expect. And those costs that they were estimating really were accounted for by the cost of spraying with the insecticides. Most growers, 71%, said that SLF management, the time and the cost of treating SLF did not impact profitability. Again, I'm going to be looking at this result in year 3 to see if that changes. In terms of risk tolerance, we asked this question because risk tolerance is really an important indicator of how amenable a grower will be or interested a grower will be in experimenting and trying new things. And we see that our Virginia growers consider themselves moderate to moderate high and even high risk takers, which says that they are going to be very open to trying new things, I think, and getting ahead of this pest. Okay, I'm sorry I'm going so fast here. I just had a lot to share. Okay, consumer survey. This again was done in 2025 at the very tail end. It was we got our results back in December of 2025. So these results are just being looked at now and analyzed by the University of Georgia. They again they asked 1,000 different consumers who were at least 18 years older about their perceptions of using insecticides on farms to treat SLF. That was the main goal. So our results came from the states there in orange, as you can see, the majority coming from New York, or at least half of them coming from New York, Pennsylvania and Virginia and New Jersey representing the other larger areas. Age groups were fairly well distributed. We had 30% that were in both the Gen X and millennial age groups, and then 20% were baby boomers or Gen Z. I'm going to share just 2 more slides about from the consumer panel, wine consumer attitudes toward pesticide use in SLF. We asked, do you believe that spraying pesticides to manage SLF in vineyards to ensure consistent wine product is acceptable? 80% said yes, they were willing to accept insecticide use if it meant they were getting consistent wine. We asked a second question to ask if spraying pesticides to manage SLF to ensure grapes were of a high quality was acceptable. And again, 79% said yes. In terms of wine consumption, most consumers were purchasing their wine from a wine store. That was 74% in the middle there. But we had another 63% that were visiting a winery to make their wine purchases, and another 60% that purchased at least 1 glass of wine at a restaurant in those states that we surveyed. So we need to bear that in mind as we're thinking about treatment strategies again. But we're already learning that consumers are willing to tolerate the use of insecticide sprays if it meant that they would get a consistent, clean, high-quality product. We did also ask another question about consumers' willingness to pay for wine that is produced without the use of insecticides. And again, we're analyzing that, but our early indications or early results are showing that that's positive, that yes, growers or consumers are willing to pay more for wine that's produced without insecticides. So I think those are both really positive messages for growers. Take-home observations from Virginia, again, state that's just starting to battle SLF on its vineyards. We know that growers have a positive attitude towards controlling SLF and they're willing to take risks. Currently, they're generally using broad spectrum insecticides, which is probably to reduce input expense and target additional pests at the same time. They are predominantly targeting adult SLF life stages. We see limited consumer opposition to pesticide use for managing SLF in vineyards. And we know some consumers are willing to pay more for a bottle of wine produced without insecticides. So I'm sure I am just creating a lot of food for thought, I hope. And if you have any questions, I'd love to try to answer those now if we have time. And otherwise, I've provided my email address and that of Alexa Lamb, who's heading up the sociological aspects of the research.
Hey, thank you so much, Gigi, for your presentation. We have just about 1.5 minutes for questions, and I do see we have one in the box here. So one person asks, were consumers asked whether they were okay if they knew the insecticide would persist in the wine they drank?
I don't think they were. I would have to go back and look at that, but I didn't design that survey. But I did review it, and I don't believe that was asked.
Okay.
That's
Do
a
you,
good question that I will make note of, so that maybe we can include that if we do that survey again.
yeah, I was going to follow up. Do you know if that is the case that the insecticide would persist in the wine?
I don't know about the insecticide. I know on the SLF side that, grapes that are harvested with mechanical harvesters will capture the SLF insect along with the grapes, and that will taint the wine and, produce an off taste. But I don't know. Did the person that asked the question, are they aware of any research that would address that issue?
Possibly they might respond to that
Okay.
in the Q&A box or in the chat. They say sorry, no. So
Okay.
that works for us. I think we are just coming up on time. Yeah, Gigi, want to thank you very much again, and we'll move on to our next speaker.
Thank you so much.
So our next speaker comes to us from the University of Toronto. We have Candice Ma presenting on the effects of a changing climate on germination and fates of non-native seeds at the edge of the Arctic. Welcome, Candice.
Good to start? Can you hear
You're
me?
good to start.
Hi, I'd like to share with you my master's research, where I looked into the effects of a changing climate on non-native seeds at the edge of the Arctic. So biological invasions are a global problem, as invasive species have the potential to negatively impact biodiversity and ecosystem functioning. This means non-native species or a species existing outside of its range due to human activity represents a growing threat. Here are examples of two different invasive plant species found here in Canada. On the left is dog strangling vine, an aggressive plant that grows in dense stands, outcompeting native species. On the right is cheatgrass, an invasive plant found out west that can elevate fire risk by building large loads of dead grass and alter fire spread patterns. And to better understand invasions, it is important to understand what affects the presence and persistence of non-native species. Invasions are not spread out evenly across the globe, and it appears that the rate of invasions differ based on latitude. So in the north, there are rarely any invasive species compared to temperate and tropical regions. Here's a graph comparing the prevalence of native versus alien species based on latitude. Invasions, the gray points, are the highest at mid-latitudes and sharply declines compared to native species in green at the poles. There are two potential reasons behind this pattern. First, because Arctic areas are isolated, the chances of species translocation are low. Second, the harsh conditions at high latitudes, such as nutrient deficiency and the cold climate, prevent non-native species from persisting even if they overcome this geographic barrier. But invasions could become a problem at high latitudes, and indeed non-native species are starting to appear in northern regions. One potential issue is the transportation of contaminated soil, which could make the problem worse by being an invasion pathway for non-native plants. Okay, yeah, and the reason why we're focusing on soil is because the soil seed bank is an avenue for invasive plants. A seed bank refers to the natural store of seeds that are found within the soil. This allows plants to stay dormant under unsuitable conditions and emerge when conditions are right. And studies have demonstrated that seeds of invasive plants are more likely to form persistent seed banks. So here on the right is an example of this. It came from a local dump. Moving soil is something that happens quite commonly in northern communities for various reasons, and this is a concern because the soil could be contaminated with non-native seeds. And while seeds in soil that do not emerge are not the issue, the question is, what if something changes? What if there is something that allows them to germinate and persist? And native seeds may be able to germinate at high rates under the changing climate in previously hostile environments. So because of climate change, the average global temperature has risen about 1.1 degrees since pre-industrialization, but This is felt disproportionately. Polar regions are facing up to 4 times the rate of warming compared to the global average. So here an image on the right demonstrates this, showing the annual mean temperature anomalies in the Arctic, B showing the annual mean temperature trends from 1979 to 2021, and C showing the local amplification ratio for the same period. This could expand the suitable range for temperate species as conditions are more aligned with their native environments, which in turn suggests the possibility of successful invasions from southern species. And in high latitude regions, climate change could help non-native seeds germinate and establish successfully, which leads to our concern about northern invasions. Altogether, this motivated my research to find if climate change makes the problem of invasions worse. I will be looking into how climatic factors, which will change in the future, the soil, the seed bank soil as a known disturbance pathway could impact the establishment of non-native plants. So specifically, my research question is, can the climatic factors of temperature and the length of the growing season increase the germination and survival of non-native plant species at high latitudes? While this is an emerging issue, there have been very limited manipulative experiments on this, so we have very little evidence of how climate could impact non-native plants and how this could worsen the threat of invasions. So my study site is in Churchill, Manitoba, on the coast of the Hudson Bay at 58 degrees north, located at the tundra boreal interface. This area has a long indigenous history as home to the Inuit, Dene, and Cree. And nowadays, Churchill is mostly a tourist and a port town. It contains the only port in the Hudson Bay. Also, the town contains a railway station that has been there for many decades, nearly a century, which is the only ground link to the south. Historically, this route has been used to ship grain from southern Canada for export through the port. Subsequently, organic refuse has been dumped in the areas around the grain silos. As a result, over 100 non-native plants have been documented within town limits and other disturbed sites around town, including roadsides and the town dump, and dozens of these species have persisted in the decades since. So here on the bottom left, you can see an example of the species of the plants that have been left behind, and I should note that there's no new soil being added to this. This has just persisted for decades. Interestingly, the fact that non-native plants have not survived outside of town limits suggests that environmental factors must be limiting them. But what if this changes? So all of this makes Churchill and the surrounding area an ideal study site. So this summer, I conducted a few experiments, one focusing on increasing the temperature and one focused on the seasonal timing of seeds and the seed bank. So I'll go into detail with both of these experiments. So for my first experiment, I tested if warmer temperatures could affect the seed bank. I had mixed seed bank soil, which was locally collected, shoveled into plots that were about 25 by 25 at 10 centimeters. I had a total of 48 plots in a common garden setup on the tundra landscape. Half were randomly selected to be treated with open-topped warming chambers, which raised the temperature near the ground surface by about 1 to 3 degrees Celsius, while the other half were controls. So I started this in early June, late May, early June, and the treatment lasted the full growing season. I measured the germination rates of all the plant species that emerged, which included Phalaspia arvense, Bersimum cheironthoides, Crepus tectorum, Galeopsis tetrahe, Chenopodium album, Taraxacum officinale, Linaria vulgaris, Silene alba, and some native Draba species. Since Phalaspia or field pennycress were the most common species I found from my plots, I then measured the heights of 5 randomly selected Phalaspia and collected and counted all the Phalaspia seeds that were there by the end of the summer. So this is what my experiment looked like from the summer. And here's what it looked like from a closer perspective. And then I'll show you my results. So some, not all the species were found to be significantly different from each other. And here are 4 graphs showing the count of surviving germinates, the red columns being the warming treatment and the blue acting as control, with the y-axis being the count of the count per plot. So here I show you 4 that did end up being significant or approaching significant. 2 of the species I have that were more abundant under warming were Erysimum cheironthoides, or wormseed wallflower, and Chenopodium album, white goosefoot, while the other two, Galeopsis tetrahete, common hemp nettle, and Linaria vulgaris, or toadflax, demonstrated this opposite pattern. As for the height of 5 randomly selected Flasby, I found the warming treatment, again represented by the red, led to a greater growth compared to the control. And as for my final measurement of this experiment, the count of Flasby seeds, I found more seeds per plant in the warmer treatment compared to the control. And as for my other experiment, this set out to understand if the timing of germination over the course of the early growing season affected their subsequent survival. So I did this by focusing on the seedlings and seeds of different species. I used 3 non-native species for this experiment, all common weedy plants from the south, and they're all they're common in southern Canada, but they're all native to Eurasia. So I had Plantago major, common plantain, Taraxacum officinale, common dandelion, and Flasby arvense field pennycress. I chose to put them on the roadsides because this is the route where they're most likely to disperse. And in 1-week intervals throughout June, I put the seeds and seedlings in the containers in the ground, both the tundra and the boreal environments, for a total of 16 sites. And I measured the survival and germination of all these species at the end of July and at the end of August. So here's what the boreal and tundra environments where I put these containers in look like. And here's what it looked like from above. You can't see much. A lot of them died in this picture. So I'll move on to the results. So this graph shows that the germination rate of the 3 species across the planting intervals. There were significant differences in the germination rates in my July measurement of all 3 species, showing a higher germination rate in the second interval of the month, suggesting that while maybe the beginning of the growing season was too hostile for germination, there still might be a benefit to germinating earlier compared to later. And then here, my last graph of this presentation, this shows the survival rate of the seedlings for each of the species across the planting intervals. So there were significant differences in the survival and survival across transplanting intervals, showing here that the later something was planted, the more likely it was to survive. And the July measurement shown by the yellow bars, this again was the same case for all the species, and this pattern even continued on to August, represented by the blue, where there were some deaths, but not enough to erase this entire trend. So in summary, I showed you 2 experiments which set out to understand how these climatic factors could impact non-native plant species through seed bank soil movement. This experiment is important because invasions are occurring everywhere in the world and are an emerging threat to the Arctic. It's even happening in places like Svalbard and Antarctica. Churchill in particular has been on the news with talks about upcoming development, which raises the question of whether biological invasions are going to be a consequence in the future. And there's still a lot we don't know about them, so my experiment is just one step in trying to understand and possibly predict northern invasions. And in my results, I showed that warming might improve some aspects of performance, specifically, however, there are varying results. There are no consistent effects on germination for all the species with warming, but there may be for size and the reproduction. For my second experiment, I found that there might be an optimal timing that could affect the future performance of plants throughout the growing season. And my work suggests the change in climate could influence some aspects of non-native plant species, and that we can anticipate changes to how they grow and survive, but these results might not be exactly what we're expecting. Nice. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and then here, everyone, if you help me with my work.
Thanks so much for your presentation, Candace. Just going to open up the floor now for questions. Don't see any in the box yet. Oh, now we do have one. Okay, so Doug asks, could the lack of spread of invasive species outside of town be because there are low risks due to limited magnitude and frequency of propagule pressure via pathways to outside of the town?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, it's also you can open up the Q&A box if it
Oh.
helps you to read it. But the person's asking if the lack of spread of invasive species outside of the town is because there's not a lot of propagule pressure through pathways going outside of the town.
I think that's a part of it, but so a previous student in our lab actually decided to test this by bringing soil and seeds and transplants outside of town, mainly through roadways and both in undisturbed sites where people don't really haven't really altered the landscape, and on disturbed sites, so roadsides and building sites. And she found that that while these species can survive for a year, they seem to trend towards extinction after a few years. So just getting rid of or even increasing that propagule pressure or increasing the chances for species to get outside of the town where they mainly exist isn't enough to overcome this other factors that maybe low nutrient soil and just generally really harsh conditions that will eventually lead these plants to extinction. And it is really surprising because they thrive so well in certain areas, but just like a kilometer or two outside of town, even if you try to do that, they seem to just die.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, tough living in northern Manitoba, I guess. We still have time, and I'm seeing another question in the chat. I do just ask it's a little easier for us to keep track of questions in the Q&A, but I'll still read this one out loud. Were the pots you used for seed germination impervious to moisture? They appear to be plastic. Would that affect seeds even with the watering?
Well, initially when I germinated those seedlings, yeah, I germinated them in petri dishes, but then I transplanted them. I moved them to, give me a sec. These containers. So I don't think where they were germinated actually affected them surviving afterwards. Because when I transplanted them, I also watered them. So the environment was the same, at least initially, until I left them alone after transplanting, and then they did their thing, which was mostly die, but some did survive, which that I thought was surprising. Yeah, this is a container I should have shown. We just buried them in the soil. And they experienced the same conditions as all the other, yeah.
I see. Well, thanks for showing us that. We don't usually have props at these presentations. We have a couple minutes left if anyone had a last minute question that they wanted to put in the Q&A. Not seeing anything else pop in there yet. I will just maybe say a reminder to the group that if you kind of get one in after we've moved on, the speaker might be able to answer your question by text. Okay, we have one last question. Do you have a green thumb yourself? Do you maybe tend to house plants or garden yourself?
I do have a lot of houseplants, but just because this past summer, because I was up in Churchill and doing field work like that, I haven't had a chance to actually have something throughout the summer. I just have some houseplants that are kind of impossible to kill.
Okay. Well, those are good ones too. Okay, I think we'll end it there. Thank you very much, Candace, for your time, and we'll move on to the last speaker. Okay, so our final speaker for the session and for today comes to us from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Please welcome Martha Volkov, who will be presenting on California's collaborative response to golden mussel.
Pulling up my screen or my share now. Oops. Back one. All right, thank you. My name is Martha Volkoff. As Emily mentioned, I'm with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And back in October of 2024, golden mussels were detected in California. A little bit about California, actually, and invasive mussels. State of California has had quagga mussels since 2007, and one in Southern California, and one population of zebra mussels in Central California since 2008. Those infestations, well, the quagga mussel infestation came by way of the Colorado River and water imported into the state, and has been largely contained to Southern California. I attribute to the arid climate and the boating practices of those in Southern California to prevent its overland spread, but it did spread through water conveyance networks in Southern California. So all three species collectively, although quagga and zebra mussel are in a different genus than golden mussel, share a lot of life history, characteristics, and impacts. So all three species are fresh or brackish water, have byssal threads that allow them to attach to surfaces and thus form biofouling. They all have planktonic larval stages, which means they can be transported overland in water, entrapped in conveyances, and as adults attached to conveyances or structures, equipment, watercraft, anything really that is in the water that they can attach to or be moved in water. They don't exceed more than 2 inches and are variable, excuse me, in color pattern. They exhibit wide environmental tolerances, and up to the introduction of golden mussel, that gave us some protections for some waters in California, but golden mussel have a lower calcium requirement than either quagga or zebra mussels. All species exhibit high reproductive and growth rates and are intensive filter feeders. So the first detection of golden mussels in California was in a freshwater port within the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. Golden mussels are native to China and Southeast Asia, but are a known invader globally in Hong Kong, Japan, and South America. As I mentioned, nearly all of California's freshwaters are vulnerable to establishment of golden mussels. And therefore, they're a significant concern to California. And in fact, I'll talk about what we have seen thus far in the invasion. I think there are many locations across North America that are suitable for invasion. So I encourage you to look closely when you look at risk assessments and the literature for golden mussel, that these are a really adaptable species. And so look at the literature. There is continuing to grow in breadth. So impacts in California specifically are to our environment, which includes our native environments, our sensitive species, and the recreation used in our environments. They also pose threats to our infrastructure, including hydropower, water conveyance systems, and also ingrained in that infrastructure is also public safety, including dams for flood protection and flow control, firefighting equipment and hydrants and water systems, which are a public safety hazard. In addition, many of the water conveyance in California deliver water to agriculture and domestic uses. And so rolling all of those impacts up, it is a significant threat to the state's economy and national economy. So I mentioned that golden mussel, we believe, were introduced into by way of a port in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, and that is circled in the red dot on the map on the left, on the right side of that lower right side. And this map is just to give you some geographic context to the state of California and where golden mussels are and where they are today as a result. So also in that delta is the red triangle in the center lower of that left map. And that is the location where there are two water conveyance, a state and a federal pumping plants that pump water from the central part of California down through the San Joaquin Valley and into Southern California. And those water conveyances support agriculture in the state as well as domestic uses in Southern California, as well as agriculture. So detections to date, we have been monitoring throughout the Delta and through those water conveyance systems over the last year and not quite a half. And we're finding golden mussels throughout the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And I should mention those waters are also interconnected to many tributaries that run miles and miles up into Northern California. So we anticipate, based on movement of watercraft in the Delta, that we will see the range of golden mussels expand within the watershed northward. Haven't seen that thus far, but what we have seen is the downstream spread of golden mussels through those water conveyance systems down to Southern California. We anticipated that. It's an unfortunate artifact of those water conveyance systems. But very notable to mention is that no detections have been made outside of that flow of Delta water thus far. So what we're seeing in infested waters of the Delta, on the left is a Doppler that was deployed in very near that location of the Port of Stockton, where the first detection of golden mussels was made, was fully encrusted with golden mussels within a year of their detection. Also, there are many moored watercraft, long-term moored watercraft in the Delta, in addition to day-use boating in the Delta. But the photos on the right are a bit of a distance shot and up-close shot of a watercraft removed from the Delta. And what we see is heavy biofouling of entire colonies of golden mussel. And should this watercraft be moved out of the Delta without intervention, you may be transplanting golden mussels, whole colonies, breeding colonies, into new water bodies. So a serious threat to the rest of California and the rest of North America. Within one of those water projects, pumping plants, these are the State Department of Water Resources grates at a facility where they separate fish from water before it's exported to Southern California. And what they're finding is golden mussels, and in fact, not just newly settled juvenile mussels, but adult mussels detaching and attaching to their screens, requiring monthly maintenance. What they used to be able to clean on an infrequent basis now require monthly cleanings, and in fact, they can't clean them fast enough in order to take them out of service, so they are duplicating the screens, removing them, cleaning them, and trading them out. And within their system, they are looking to add modifications, retrofit to deal with this new reality of golden mussels. So in response to the detection of golden mussels back in October of 2024, the state of California formed a golden mussel task force. That task force is comprised of a steering committee of state and federal agency leads, as well as multiple teams that are vary really in personnel of folks from all across state, federal, local academia who have volunteered to participate in the state's response. And we formed teams at that onset, and some of those teams have accomplished their efforts, and others continue to work. And I'll go through some of those teams that have been significant in our over the last year, but I will take a moment to mention that at the original point of time of detection and over the last year, the department and many of our state and federal partners have been operating on no new resources and in a time of kind of fiscal challenges for the state and federal government. Not an ideal time, but in response to natural resource invasive species, there really, in my career, has never been a good time for a significant species detection and response. In the last year or in the last couple of months, we have had new resources come to bear. So that is very helpful. So one of the teams in that initial response worked to, well, each of the teams worked to develop content for a statewide golden mussel response strategy. And it is a strategy for what we should or could do, but not necessarily a response plan to implement, but was helpful in framing the issue and identifying priority needs. The objectives of that plan included communication, containment, prevention, monitoring, partner engagement, population suppression, and science and capacity building. Containment and population suppression have been a challenge and very low input in the state's response, given our existing resources to implement, but 2026 is looking better. So outreach, we have produced some products, and outreach is one of the most important components to invasive species management, particularly one where recreation is a primary vector of spread. We've also worked closely with water managers in California. Water is managed by state, federal, and local agencies, so they are the agencies responsible for access to those water bodies, so supported them in standing up invasive mussel prevention programs, and worked with interagency partners with a monthly meeting that is open to all who are interested, and it is really our primary forum for distributing information and sharing information among others who are invested in the issue. It has also produced several ad hoc groups to address very specific needs with specific audiences, as well as it has enabled us to communicate about science and capacity building, to engage with others who are working to fill in research and informational needs, and keep tabs on the progress of those. Looking ahead into 2026, the state of California anticipates standing up a boater inspection ban program in hopes that it will alleviate that workload of individual water managers and make access to boatable waters by the public more predictable and reliable. And to do so working with private businesses to stand up skilled service providers to inspect and decontaminate watercraft, all with the goal of curtailing that overland movement of mussels on biofouled watercraft and equipment. And this fiscal reality that we have been working under for the last year is continues into the future. And so being creative and collaborative to work with our partners and all levels of government to explore avenues to impact, to identify paths forward and solutions. And I leave you today with a call to action to spread the word and concern about golden mussel and really evaluate what the threat is within your jurisdiction. And for those of you in the field, to keep an eye out for biofouling bivalves and report them to your AIS lead immediately. And to promote the clean, drain, and dry practice in your work and in contexts that you can provide and infuse that into. And with that, feel free to reach out if you'd like to connect at my email, invasives@wildlife.ca.gov. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your presentation, Martha. I think we have a few minutes here for questions. I can see one has popped up. Chloe asks, are other ports being notified of potential contamination of cargo ships coming out of the port of Stockton? I'm excited to find out their temperature threshold and if it's in line with ZQM and if EarthTech will be useful against them.
There's a lot of questions there. Yes, we are working with other Pacific states with ports. Now, we have in California, State Lands Commission is the primary agency that regulates shipping. And so, yes, they are communicating with at least, I can't speak to internationally, but certainly within other Western states, yes. And temperature threshold, is it aligned with QZM? Yes, I would say generally yes. I meant to pull up and reference a publication that has looked at temperature tolerance on the colder front for golden mussel, and apologies, I failed to put that in the presentation. But generally, yes, they can survive and thrive in environments that are equivalent to quagga and zebra mussel, and if EarthTech will be used against them. State of California is not directly pursuing that.
Okay, thank you. We have under a minute left. Shelley asks, could you tell us about the boat banding program?
So, boat banding program, we would, as I mentioned, water managers set their own standards for entry into their watercraft, into their water bodies. And there is a caution because the consequences of a mussel infestation is so high. They are reluctant to really have a reciprocal program. Our goal is to create that platform for them to communicate with each other that might give them confidence to honor each other's bans. But minimally, what we're hoping with the banding program is to have service providers who can inspect and or decon watercraft, so that boats attempting to launch, that water manager has confidence in the work that is done, be able to honor that band and allow watercraft to launch without unnecessary delays.
Okay, thank you. I will go with just one more question just because we are running a little ahead of schedule. I'll let this be the last one though. You mentioned ports. Are you working with the American Association of Port Authorities?
I am not. As I mentioned, State Lands Commission is our state agency responsible or with authority over managing ports and commercial shipping. So I will take that down and check in with them.
Okay. Thanks again very much, Martha. And thanks to all the session speakers for this session. I'm going to pass it back to Maddie.
Awesome. What a great day we've had so far. Thank you to Emily and to all of our speakers for joining us. Tune in first thing tomorrow morning for the Invasive Species Center Awards ceremony, where we'll celebrate the leadership and commitment of individuals who help move that yardstick towards a Canada where land and water are free from invasive species. Have a great night and see you tomorrow.